Hello everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm very excited. My name is Suzanne and I'm a genetic epilepsy researcher with a background in psychology. 2 years ago, I started my PhD at the University of New South Wales and the Sydney Children's Hospital here in Australia. I have a family member with a developmental epileptic encephalopathy, and I'm extremely passionate about taking steps by partnering with families to develop resources that are meaningful following a genetic epilepsy diagnosis. While I appreciate that some but not all individuals with an SCN2A variant have a developmental and epileptic encephalopathy, I really hope that what I'm presenting can be in some way useful for all families of a child with a rare and complex condition. So, developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, what are they? Developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, also known as DEE, which I will keep referring to as DEE for the remainder of this presentation. I hope that's all right. These are a complex group of neurological conditions that affect up to 1 in every 1,000 children. This group of epilepsies are associated with recurring and life-threatening seizures that are exceptionally hard to treat. And seizures have a profound impact on the development and quality of life of children and families. Chronic comorbidities commonly include severe intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, and movement disorders. Our understanding of these conditions has evolved dramatically over the last number of decades. And thanks to advances in genetic research and technologies, a genetic diagnosis can now be reached in up to 50% of children. So we know that caring for a child with a complex epilepsy can be extremely challenging. In the context of severe epilepsy, stress can often be related to uncontrollable and unpredictable life-threatening seizures. There is now an increasing body of literature showing that chronic stress is showing immediate and long-term effects on families, with a high incidence of depression and anxiety. Individual pathogenic variants for genetic DEE diagnosis are extremely rare. And while a genetic diagnosis at large has been associated with many benefits, parents of a child with rare and complex genetic conditions face unique challenges, often without a clear treatment pathway or a body of information to wrap around their child's diagnosis. We also know from our engagement with families from the Sydney Children's Hospital that there is a high need for a new model of care because interventions to support these families are extremely limited. So this really forms the rationale for my PhD, which aims to understand how the informational, emotional, and psychosocial needs of parents can be met in order to work with parents to co-design tailored resources that can support families to navigate and manage their child's rare condition. I've been working with my team of supervisors to develop psychosocial resources that can offer support to families. So over the next few slides, I'll briefly walk you through in further detail some of the steps involved in my PhD that serves as a framework for each of these resources. So the first step of my project involved conducting a systematic review. This is a fancy research term to describe conducting a deep dive into the medical literature to uncover and critically analyze all available evidence documenting a particular topic. So we set out to understand parents' information needs as well as their preferences regarding information content and their preferred strategies for information delivery. Our findings showed a number of unmet needs for both tangible information services and emotional supports. So unmet needs of tangible information included a clear need for understandable and condition-specific information on their child's DEE, as well as information about psychiatric and behavioural comorbidities and information to help parents to navigate appropriate healthcare services. We also found that limited access to such information compromised parents' ability to access appropriate healthcare resources and services. However, parents also highlighted a particular need for content on how to access emotional and mental health care supports. And these unmet information needs were associated with greater stress, poorer mental health, and lower satisfaction with healthcare. A second finding from our systematic review was that parents' need for information context differed during different stages of their child's development post-diagnosis. So, for example, around their child's initial diagnostic period, parents really required information to understand their child's genetic diagnosis, as well as the consequences of the medications and how to navigate the healthcare system during this diagnostic odyssey. Approximately 1 year post-diagnosis, parents were largely concerned with information to optimize seizure control and to manage emerging developmental comorbidities, and they also needed access to early therapeutic interventions. Approximately 5 years post-diagnosis, parents required information on transition care plans as well as behavior management plans, and they also desired information on how to access social support groups because they tended to be extremely socially isolated during this time. So these findings really spoke loudly to us that there was a clear need to develop tailored and multi-pronged interventions, targeting the different information needs of families across different stages of their child's condition post-diagnosis. So findings from this systematic review were used to inform the development of information resources that were specifically designed to explain the meaning of DEE in understandable language to families and clinicians. These genetic epilepsy resources were developed by a multidisciplinary team, which included genetic clinicians and epilepsy specialists. Before we made these resources available online, we first importantly surveyed parents to understand whether or not these resources were understandable and whether they contained sufficient detail for parents. We also wanted to learn whether or not these information resources improved their genetic knowledge, and we wanted to know that parents found these resources reliable and trustworthy. So these information resources can now be found on our Pediatric Epilepsy New South Wales website, and we would be very, very keen to have you check them out and give us some feedback. Step 2 of my project involved conducting a large psychosocial study trying to understand the impact of genetic testing on parents of a child with a developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. So I conducted in-depth interviews with 25 families that were recruited from the Sydney Children's Hospital Network. The interviews were designed to understand parents' unmet needs, both before, during, and after their experiences undergoing genetic testing with their child, as well as kind of to get a broad overview picture of the psychosocial experiences raising a child with a genetic epilepsy. I also included survey questions to try and understand the impact of genetic testing on parents and families' quality of life measures, as well as how satisfied parents and families were with their experiences receiving genetic counselling. 5 main themes emerged from these interviews, which included, firstly, the importance of genetic counselling, particularly for families faced with genetic testing in the acute care setting. We also found extreme challenges parents faced in managing the progression of their child's genetic epilepsy with limited prognostic information, which over time contributed to physical and emotional burnout. A lack of understanding regarding the severity of their child's genetic epilepsy and communicating their child's genetic diagnosis without resources was also extremely challenging for families and impeded access to appropriate supports. However, perceived supports from healthcare professionals who had a vested interest in these families and other families who provided support was also associated with greater capacity to adapt more positively to their child's diagnosis. So following continued examination of the parent interviews, we were able to develop a framework that mapped the psychosocial experiences of parents throughout different stages of their child's diagnostic journey. So this diagram here represents a snapshot overview of the themes we derived from the interviews, ranging from parents' initial experiences in the acute care setting to managing uncertainty with their child's diagnosis, as well as their experiences raising and advocating for their child's needs, and their experiences gaining empowerment through access to social support organizations. However, one of the most striking findings that was discussed in each and every parent interview was the extreme need for psychological supports that matched and understood their circumstances. So this really provided the structure for the third step of my project, which involved bringing these themes back to our families to understand how we could most effectively support their mental health care needs. So co-design is a research process which involves actively partnering with families to include their perspectives at all stages of the research planning and development to try and ensure that the output and resources accurately meet their needs. So using this methodology, we invited parents to become members of our parent steering committee. Interested parents were then invited to participate in focus group workshops. The purpose of these workshops was to collaborate with parents to further analyse and discuss whether or not the themes we had found accurately represented their experiences, how we could design resources to optimally support these needs. And we also discussed what parents felt were working well to support their mental health care needs, as well as what gaps existed in terms of accessing resources and what aspects of current supports could be improved. Parent feedback revealed that although there was complexity across each individual diagnosis, there was also a lot of commonality in terms of parents' psychological support care needs. Parents felt it was extremely important to normalise access to mental health care supports. And they also discussed in detail how difficult it was to connect with a psychiatrist or a psychologist who really understood their needs. Parents also felt that it was important to balance ongoing challenges, coping with their child's diagnosis, with hope and gratitude for their child, and the impact of reframing their child's genetic diagnosis early towards improving outcomes for the whole family. So over these focus group sessions, parents identified 6 key domains that mapped their experiences of raising a child with a genetic epilepsy. Considering families had emphasised continuous times, various difficulties accessing their child's psychological supports, we wanted to ensure that these resources we were developing were accessible to families and practically met their needs. And parents felt this could be best achieved initially through the format of video. So these 6 central themes prioritised by parents that are provided on this slide were used as building blocks to develop 6 individual resources designed to offer mental health care supports tailored to parents' role in caring for a child with a rare genetic condition. The development of these mental health care resources were guided by our team psychiatrist, who has dedicated his entire career to helping children and families with very severe and complex medical conditions. Each video is grounded in positive psychology principles and discusses ways to manage challenges faced by parents of a child with a rare and complex condition. All of the videos we have developed include quotes from parents with practical key psychoeducational messages, which are also emphasized again at the end of each video. I'm going to play you on the next slide a brief clipping of one of the videos, just to give you an example of what they kind of look like.
Finding a strange sort of do what helps each other as a family, not what we think others expect of us. Be gentle with ourselves. We have limits. Don't be afraid of being playful and tearful.
So, Not all researchers have the opportunity to work and learn from families and telling us what they need. I would really love to continue partnering with families to learn how to make these resources more meaningful. So before I make these videos accessible online, I would very much like to include your perspectives to assess whether or not these resources are indeed valuable. So I've designed a small, short online survey, and the questions are just briefly trying to tap into whether or not these resources are helpful to families and to what degree the resources are useful and relevant. I'm also interested in learning about whether or not these resources are emotionally acceptable to families, and I've included open freestyle questions for your feedback. So over the next coming weeks, I will be circulating a flyer with a link to the online survey through the Genetic Epilepsy Team Australia webpage. And I'll be very grateful if you would like to pass on this flyer to any interested families who you might know have a child with a genetic epilepsy, or if you indeed yourself would like to view the videos and to participate in the survey. That would really help us out. Thank you so much again for your time today. If you have any questions about anything I've discussed, please feel free to email me. I would love to hear from you. You can also visit our webpage, the Paediatric Epilepsy New South Wales website. I provided the links here, and our research is also can be found on this link below. Thank you so much again. Have a lovely day.